Thank you for having me. Before we start, can we acknowledge the best friend staff that's in the room? You're very welcome. And they're doing a great job. They're taking care of me. And believe me, many people who know me know it takes a little to corral me. Who laughed over there? Corey. Yeah, Corey laughed. Okay. Corey knows me from Texas, so she definitely knows how much it takes to corral me sometimes. So I wanted to remind everybody, or to just let you know that this is a collaborative class. This is a collaborative presentation, but to hold your questions till the end, and that has to do with some rules of recording and reproducing. So, but I want you while you're sitting there to start thinking about your questions, because the subject matter that I have it's formulaic, but it's also, a lot of it is conceptual. And so what you'll notice in this presentation is that my way of thinking about it, and my way of approaching my work and anything that I've dealt with in the humane world, is to be conceptual and to gravitate towards those things that are useful, but not to stick to a specific formula. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I started out in the city of Dallas as an animal control officer, and eventually matriculated to the city of Houston, and then to San Antonio as the assistant director, and now I am the executive director of the animal care and control team of Philadelphia. And the reason why that's important is because I think that this resume embodies somebody who has continually improved throughout my career. So how many people would think that an animal control officer would be capable of heading a no-kill initiative for a city? And I think one of our undervalued resources is the animal control officer, and we'll talk more about that later, but that's something that we all get to think about, and it'll be part of some of the forward thinking that I've really ingrained into this presentation. So if you look at the city of Philadelphia, I started there in November of 2015, so I haven't been there very long. We have 1.5 million people. Our budget is 4.8 million, so please do not use us as an example of if you want more money, because we don't have it. 25,000 intake, about average of 28,000 over the last 4 years, and a 76% life-saving rate and 68 employees. We are an anomaly in a lot of ways, and the reality is that part of how we're doing it is through great community effort, great employee effort, and motivating the public to support us. And as part of that process, we are going to kick it up a notch even in this next year. But right now, I think we've made a lot of progress, and the next question is, how do we continue that progress, which is part of the culture of creating an environment of continuous improvement. When I think about it, and conceptually when I think about it, it's an idea of, what environment do I want? How do I create the ecosystem that supports my staff, and also that promotes our two major goals, which is as an animal control agency, is to make sure the public is safe, but then also to have a high life-saving rate. And those two, you would think that they're competing issues, but they really are one, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. A lot of what we're going to talk about is, there's a lot more detail involved to a lot of these subjects, but within the time frame we have, I'm going to give you some directional pull things that will assist you in, I think, or has assisted me in the development and that continuous improvement. So the first thing I recommend is self-improvement. And so one of the things that, as an animal control officer, that I started out doing is really listening and learning every part of the operation. And that really assisted me in terms of who and how I developed in this profession. One of the tools that you can use that's a very simple tool, and it costs about $20, so it's reasonable, is the Strength Finder. The reason why I am recommending this is because it's probably one of the most accurate self-assessment tools out there. And it allows any person who uses it to do their own self-assessment, and it provides you with tools for that $20 that really help in the development to you as an individual. Some of my, which I know I was picked for this session, is because some of my talents exist. Well, the 5 talents they identified were me as a developer, strategic, woo, which means I like to. I'm not going to steal anybody's girlfriend, but I like to get to know people and to win them over to different ideas and concepts. Maximizer, which is kind of a way of saying perfectionist, a nice way of saying perfectionist, and that does have a downside. Always trying to get better. To have that as a trait really sometimes keeps me up at night. Positivity, which is, I spend very little time in the negative realm, in the negative world. And so those are some things, and I'm just giving you some ideas of how you would look at yourself. And so the book has tools. There's plenty of other books out there you can use, but that's one of the ones I've used that really assisted me in the development of my own talents. And also what I use with my staff in the development of their talents. There's another form, which is a DISC assessment. We don't have to talk very much about that, but it's something very similar. It's an intensive survey and an ability for you to take a look at yourself. And I strongly recommend self-assessment. And the reason why I do is because a lot of professionals in our business don't look in the mirror enough and really start to move the needle from where they are to where they should be. One of the great things that I've been able to either have forced on me or also been able to develop myself is to take concepts that in the beginning I really did not agree with or believe in, didn't have a real sense for, and been able to take concepts like trap, neuter, return, and take it from the kill model in my mind, not just as an organization, but in my mind, so that by the time I became a supervisor, it was transferred from something that was conceptual in my mind to something that actually could happen in reality, because now this program has an advocate on a level that's a decision-making level. Staff assessment, I'm very strong on this because your team makes or breaks anything that you do in the shelter, and their ability. I think about, I have 2 of my former co-workers, Dr. Marilyn Godbetter and Bethany Hines, sitting on the front row, and we all work together at the San Antonio Animal Care Services. And the one thing that I always leaned on was the fact that no matter what happened on our worst day, we always had each other. And so I could lean on them, and I lean on them to this day because of the work that we did together. And so it went beyond. The team concept goes beyond, in my mind, just the shelter, but it also is something that I have found was very helpful for me to ingrain into my life and in my career in terms of having friends that live in different cities and being able to compare. But knowing the talent of individuals on your team is very important, because we want to take those people that are talented in certain areas and put them in a position to have the greatest impact on our shelter. Coaching the team, I look at myself as a coach. So I take opportunities with my staff. I interact with them quite a bit to talk to them about concepts, and some of the concepts we'll be talking about later in this presentation. Talk to them about concepts and why we do what we do, so that it ingrains in them, and it's also puts skin in the game for me. So these are not just things that we wrote on a piece of paper that we want people to do. These are actual things that while you're in the shelter, we ask you to live and to embody and to become. Working as a team, relying on each other's strengths. So knowing that I may be able to have it all in a shelter, but I am not going to be able to do it all. And so we need different people and different employees in our shelter. So the team, one of the reasons I have this here is because I see a lot of times, and I've had the opportunity to travel to different shelters across the country, is either staff feeling like they have to do it all themselves, or people who want all the credit for doing it. And the reality is that nothing happens without a team approach. Even the things and that's success and failure. And once we get to that place where we understand that, there's a lot of growth and a lot of development and a lot of change that can happen. Hiring people to improve your team, I think that's one of the lost arts, is what are you hiring for? What qualities? And does it fit your current team? Not the archetype, not the structure. I will be critical just slightly of our some of our hires for director across the country, because I think all of you, or maybe most of you, have experienced it. We are hiring the wrong people in a lot of instances. And we have people that should get hired, that should be looked at, that I think because we're not looking at what we really need and what skills that person has, we're just looking at the resume, we're not getting some of those people to fill, some of the more talented people to fill the director positions. Creating a management philosophy. So I have a management philosophy that, I just continue to collect them, have continued to collect them over the years. Some of them are from people that I worked for. Others are ones that I've developed for myself. Do the right thing. That was one of my former directors. And I learned that as an ACO when she was my director in the city of Dallas. And that just is the way of saying, think about every circumstance and remember what that circumstance needs, and be that person that the circumstance needs. Be the example. That's different to me from setting an example. I want to embody and live what I'm saying, not just repeat it as a concept, but actually someone who would not even know that I'm living these, or what the actual words are, would be able to say them just based on my conduct. The quality of the work should exceed the quantity. A lot of times we move too fast and we're doing too many things. And I noticed that at the shelter I'm at now, at the Animal Care and Control Team of Philadelphia. And I noticed that in San Antonio, which is sometimes we're taking on so much that we don't give the feedback to the people around us in our team that I'm taking on too much, I need to scale back because the quality of my work is starting to suffer. Maybe more speed. Maybe more speed is a concept I learned in a seminar, and it basically goes like this. There was a company that is owned by was owned by a Japanese company, and they sent a consultant to the United States. So the consultant didn't speak English, and he walked all through the factories, and he looked at things, but he never told anybody anything, even his translator, never used his translator. So he's leaving, and the group that is hosting him is like, oh, do you have any feedback for us? I mean, what is it we could do differently? And he just turned around before he got into his limousine to go back to Japan. He said, maybe more speed. And what the idea is a lot of times it's very simple. What we're doing our improvements are there for the taking, and we don't look at it. And maybe more speed is a concept for me as well, because let's do it again, but let's do it faster. Let's see how fast, because remember, when an animal comes into our shelters, the clock is ticking on the negative side. A lot of people have a concept that the shelter is some type of safe haven. Oh, we just need to get them in the shelter so we can get them back out. And we'll talk about that. That construct is antiquated. It's still used throughout the country, but there's a different concept that I'd like to introduce, and some of you already probably are aware of it, but I'd like to introduce it to you as well. Make programs aerodynamic. We're talking about flow. We're talking about, and we'll talk how do we make that happen, but flow, slickness, making programs things that people are readily available to people. Something that is a person can go from the time they want to assist to the time that they actually complete the assistance as quickly as possible. Be a self-cleaning oven. We'll talk about that later. That's just about knowing when you're failing. Because if you don't know, and somebody else does, by the time you find out, it's already too late a lot of times. And then I need my staff more than they need me. So there's directors, and they fall all over the map, and they get fired, they come and go, but guess who is still there? The staff. When I recently got hired, one of the staff questions was, how do we know you're not just going to leave after you get a different opportunity? And I had to commit to the staff that I would be there for several years, which I have no problem with doing because that fits into my life plan anyway. So what are we talking about? We're talking about animal sheltering. And a lot of times with animal sheltering problems, we add animal people to that to solve those problems. So we need to get a person who's more knowledgeable on animals. But the problem is, or the question is, what if your problem is not an animal shelter problem? What if it's a process problem? What if it's a business problem? And so what I've developed over the years is a concept, at least for me, that we should treat our shelter like a business, that it should be something that we use business solutions to evolve and to evolve the shelter to a place where we can actually, where animals get out quicker, where we're solving public safety problems, where we are something that the community can support. So one of the constructs, or one of the concepts I use, and I actually was trained to be a white belt in this because I wanted to really work with some of the staff that were analytical and already had some of these concepts already that we had hired at the shelter that I worked at in San Antonio, was Six Sigma. And what that is it's something that a lot of the large companies, Toyota, Ferrari, Louis Vuitton, the list goes on and on. They use this, and these are multi-billion-dollar companies with places all over the world. And so having a white belt is probably adequate for a shelter staff member, but it's define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And all of these are all business concepts. And while we hear shelter statistics and let's measure, let's analyze, let's be more transparent, the concept that is actually based on is Six Sigma and processes like it. And so this gives you the inside track of how you make those things happen within your shelter. Process mapping is another form of a business process that I strongly encourage. The first thing we did in the city of San Antonio to raise our life-saving rate was to fix our vaccination process. That process, by fixing it and by putting it on a flow chart and defining who was responsible for what and where the breakdown was when there is a breakdown, because a lot of times something doesn't work in the shelter and we decide to blow the whole thing up. But what if you only needed to blow up a piece of it? Or what if you only needed to say to a particular group of staff, this is your responsibility, tell me why it's in breakdown. And this is not a way to point the finger, but it's more of a way to work with that staff to fix the problem, and how do we make what we want to have happen. This is a pretty complicated flow chart, but at the same time, it's an example of, there's less complicated ones, but I would, there's classes, there's videos, there's all types of things that you can resources that you can use to implement something like this. Core values. All of the companies, all of the businesses that are really successful, Microsoft included, Bill Gates in case you didn't know, are core values. And these are things that resonate with the staff in terms of, what are we about? Where are we as a staff, and what culture do we want to have in our shelters? And so you look at Microsoft: honesty, passionate, respect, persistent, self-critical, excellence, value-driven. I mean, those are concepts we can use in the shelter. Would you agree? And so at ACT Philly, we just developed these as part of our strategic planning process: transparency, respect, innovation, commitment, empathy, and professionalism. And for those of you that are kind of slow on the uptake, that spells tricep. It was printed in bold. The other thing that I think really distinguishes a culture of continuous improvement is creating office classrooms. Now, do I want you to go out and go back to your shelter and say, I need a classroom to work in as an office? No. What I want you to do is I want you to make your environment a teaching environment. As a staff, and one of the great things that I watched is, and that I watch in my current shelter and I watch in my past shelters, is walking by an office and seeing people writing on the whiteboard, explaining things to one another, whiteboards full, people being pulled aside and asked, hey, something happened, let's talk about why it happened and how we can fix it. I think that's and so not only using the whiteboard, but also, presentations like mine, it doesn't take any special skill. Apparently, I'm here, to present a presentation for your staff. And for those of you that have like certification in your state or those sorts of things or requirements for training, all that can be developed in-house. And so I'd encourage you to really to step to the forefront if there are concepts and things that you want to teach your staff, or even at a conference to step forward and be that change, that person that comes up with an idea that may change our industry. Move the big rocks. So a lot of times we have these things at the shelter. I'll tell you a quick story. I was in a meeting and a person was telling me how he was best friends are. Our grant is 2 years away from ending, so he's not really worried about it. He wasn't worried about how things, if we were going to be able to implement the things that we needed to, because we had 2 years. So I asked him, I said, how many projects around here are 2 years old that haven't been done? I could see that kind of resonated with a lot of you. And so that's the idea, is that life is either right now or too late, especially in a shelter. And so we've got to continue to raise that urgency. The big rock concept is to take those things that are habitual for you, but also are urgent because they are things that need to change now. And I can't tell you what those are in your shelter. Everybody has something different. For us, I'll go back to in San Antonio, it was the vaccination process. We needed to change it now. When we changed it, what happened? Well, animals were vaccinated, they were healthier, more rescue groups had confidence in our ability to give them a healthy animal. And so look at the number of things that changed. We also were able to drive home a point to the staff of how important it was, when before we said it was important, but we actually didn't act upon it. We didn't show in our actions that it was important. Filling up the box. So we have a lot of people want to come up with these new ideas, and they want to do this, and they want to, I get them in my office, they're in the suggestion box. And why don't we do this and that? I have a total different stance on that. And part of the reason why people do it is because think outside the box. That was like a concept starting in probably about 20 years ago, and it's continued to be a cliche. So how many of us are maximizing what we're currently doing? Like, for instance, those of you who use PetPoint, those of you who use Chameleon, one of the things I found, and I'm finding in Philly and I've found at my past shelters, is that the improvements that needed to be made is we needed to maximize what we were doing in those two softwares and making sure that the staff was ironclad. That's an improvement that's right there at your fingertips, something you could grab. It's low-hanging fruit, as they call it, that will significantly increase the productivity of your staff without you having to go out and think of some new concept. Tell your story or somebody else will. The reality is that as part of your improvement, there are things right now you are proud of in your shelter that nobody knows about, that other people are criticizing. Maybe you have an underground euthanasia chamber somewhere in that, as if the cities can afford to build something underground, they barely want to build something above ground for us a lot of times. So or just different things, stories. I've had people that sent out stories. We have a story of an animal that the rescue group that took them did not want to be known. And now that story has morphed into, it got given to dog fighters. And And it was, there's some conspiracy as to why we're not revealing the identity of where the animal went. And so our job, and what we can do a lot better in our industry, is to tell our story and to take these different websites and the media itself, and instead of, understand that we're using them for a purpose, and the purpose is to tell our story, because other people are more than willing. You can change the people, or you can change the people. So what that means in the shelter, and I see a few of you got it, but I'll explain it to the rest of you, is, we can only tolerate so much in a shelter. And, it's not necessary for a person to agree with everything. It's necessary in my mind for them to act like someone who does. So is to be very, you like that, right? So, and the idea is that I can only reason, coach. Some of this has to do with our resources, counsel, discipline you. Eventually, you've got to go. Or you can decide to work in that team concept and be part of the changes that we all want to have happen. Know when you're failing. We talked about being the self-cleaning oven, be the first to know. Because what's happening a lot of times, and especially I'll talk to some of you that are working in municipal shelters, we have a contract with the city. So we're a nonprofit that has a contract with the city. And so we raise funds as well as the city gives us a meager amount of money. But the reality is what's happening is a lot of us don't understand our own statistics. We don't understand our own processes. Because we're not working as a team, our staff is out there telling people everything under the sun. And it's because we haven't educated them properly in many cases. And what happens is those people take that information, they give it to one of your politicians. The politician comes back to you, or their staff does, and asks you questions that you don't realize are based on information somebody else gave you. And the media does this all the time. And when you answer a question differently, or you're uninformed, you just gave away your expert card. Treat everything in the show that you do as a program. So we run an operation, but I look at all of our operations and the different elements, whether it's cleaning, whether it's veterinary services, whether it's our front counter, as a program. And so programs, it takes, because there's elements that go along with that it be integrated into the rest of the shelter. That it has moving parts, so it needs a mechanic. That's me when I had hair. That it be monitored, that it be tweaked. So we look at it as a living, breathing entity that has to be integrated and has to, throughout the shelter, understand that there's ripple effects. Every program that you use or every program that you develop in your shelter has ripple effects throughout the rest of the shelter. We'll talk a little bit now about strategic planning. The strategic planning is, I think, key, and there's going to be probably 3 or 4 slides on this, because I think it's key to everything that we do. My background is, part of it is I played football, and I talk a little slow because I got hit on the head too many times. But the reality is that I look at it as teaching players on a football team how we want them to operate. Because when you get out there on the floor, when you're out there in the shelter, there should be a predictable outcome. So if you go to sleep at night wondering, I wonder what this employee is going to do, that's a problem. And part of it may be yours, and the other part may be theirs. But the question that I ask myself is, what have I taught them? Am I teaching the right concepts? Do we have the right information available to the employees so that they're able to function in a way that's predictable? We know when an officer goes out to a call that they're going to accomplish it in a way that the city wants them to accomplish it. When an adoption counselor sits down with a potential adopter, are they implementing their own rules like, oh, this is no for this, no for that, no for that, no for that, or are they actually following the concepts and the policies that we have in place? So just real quick on the strategic planning, ground your planning in clearly stated background and history. And that's important because it gives that strategic plan standing in terms of why are we at this place in history. And it also it documents something that's extremely important so that future generations of shelter staff understand where you've come from. And I think so for instance, we're at 76%. We used to be at 11 or something less than that. I think in 1999, the USA Today said that Philadelphia was like 99% kill. And we were in Dallas at the time, and I was reading the article as an animal control officer, and we were laughing at Philadelphia like, oh man, they really suck. What's weird, we didn't realize, now number one, I didn't realize I'd be working there one day, but the other thing I didn't realize, San Antonio was in that article too, which is funny, was we weren't turning backflips either. I didn't even know our life-saving rate. Maybe we just got lucky and just weren't featured in the article. But the idea behind it is to know where you came from so that people understand the perspective. Because a lot of times as you travel this road and you increase your live release rate, you'll still have the same criticism that you had when you were a high kill shelter. And some of you can probably attest to that. 3 to 5 year timeline, that's pretty standard, just to give and benchmarks within it. So like I said earlier, there's a lot of detail involved. I wish I was given a strategic planning course, but these are some of the very general concepts. Employee input, they're the subject matter experts. I would encourage you to include your employees on pretty much any decision you're making in the shelter. You may decide to make that decision. However, the employee input is critical. Deciding and announcing does not work. You go behind closed doors, you start coming up with this grand plan. Meanwhile, what you think is happening out there is not actually happening. And so that's why employees are critical. Partner agencies, I have one of Melissa Levy, who's in the audience, the executive director of Paws in our city, which is an adoption agency and also a sterilization clinic. Of note, Melissa actually used to be a volunteer for us, and she, within the last, I think it's 10 years, has developed this amazing organization, and it really speaks to action and activity. And one of the things that we are, as part of my strategic planning process, is working to develop strategic plans that connect with our partner agencies. Our surveying and communication, you're not going to be able to talk to everybody that wants to talk to you, nor are you going to want to talk to everybody that wants to talk to you. But you should still know what they think. You won't have time, honestly. We have over 200 partner agencies. I can't sit down with each one of them as much as I would like to. But surveying and communication, finding ways to communicate, positive ways to communicate, and surveying them is a great way to enhance your strategic planning process. Elected officials, I will tell you, elected officials, they are supporting agendas. They are funding you because of an agenda. They're not funding you just based on your organization or because you're you. The reason why I say that is because find out what their agenda is. Where are they coming from? What's important to them? If you're preaching a adoption, life-saving message to a public safety council member, that council member or that public official is going to look at you as disconnected. You're going to look at them as disconnected. My belief is that you can accomplish the same thing, but also speak to what is important to them. Because remember who holds the purse strings. A facilitator. Who has time? Raise your hand if you have time to plan a strategic planning process. So all of you have other jobs? Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. The reality is that none of us do. And so in our city, in Philadelphia, we have an innovation team that we're using. I got the idea to use the innovation team from the city of San Antonio, who sent an innovation team in. A lot of times there's resources within your city, even in the city government, that you can use. It's a matter of picking and poking and asking the right questions to the right people. Trust the process that you created. And so even, sometimes I even look at it and I think, are we doing the right thing? Are we going the right direction? And what I get to lean back on is the fact that we have a plan in place and that we've thought it through, continue to hold the line. And now, if there's something that needs to be removed or blown up, by all means, but don't allow yourself to be diverted by new ideas and new concepts or criticism when what you are doing is working, and it may be just a disconnect of, am I telling my story? So here's a sample of some strategic priorities that can come from a strategic planning process. Enhanced enforcement, controlling the stray population, increasing the live release rate, and increasing public outreach. What's interesting about this to me is that it covers the public safety. It covers also the people that want to save all the animals, and all of us in the shelter should want to save them all. We can't save them all many times, but we should always strive for that. But then also the grassroots portion, which is the increased public outreach. Somebody in Texas asked me a question about how do we bridge the gap between the people that speak Spanish and how do we get them to understand what we want them to understand. And my question was, why are we trying to get them to understand? Why aren't we're the professionals, why aren't we continuing in our education and understanding of them? And that's part of being grassroots to the level of couch, living room, yard, knowing people, and asking them to join something that we know is, well, I don't know if we know anything, but I do know this. If there's resources, our job is to connect them to them, not to ask people to come to us. And so this covers some very key areas, I think, that in a shelter or especially those of you who have a life-saving mission and also a public safety mission, I think this is something that could really help bridge that gap. Policies. So one thing that's going to support your strategic plan internally is policies that are really based on principles. And if you look at this policy makeup, this form, it's the policy summary, the purpose of the policy, the desired outcome of the policy, who's responsible for revising the policy, who's responsible for carrying out the policy, and also who is the policy owner. That is important because things change in an organization on a yearly basis. So when we talk about continuous improvement, the way to codify that improvement and that new concept is to put it in a policy, train the staff on it, get the staff to sign off on it, also get the staff's feedback in the beginning before you implement this policy, and then really take and teach it to your staff and live by it and it's a living document. So if it needs to be changed, change it. And usually the policy process is a yearly process of revising and taking a look at so that it's not something that is sitting in the corner that's 20. All of the shelters that I've gone to, their policy manual was something I had to blow dust off of. And so that's something that in a shelter environment, and with the fast pace and the changing times and the information age we're in, we've got to stay on top of things. This is basically just an example of performance measures. So the numbers are what they are, but the idea is to track performance of all of your programs and to be able to give your staff something to say, this is how well we're doing and this is what it's going to take to get to the next level. What you also do as part of this process is you place these concepts broken down in smaller bites in employees' performance plans. That's so if you want, 16,000 animals impounded, then you need to let each animal control officer know how many animals they should impound during a year. You should also let the shelter staff know this is how many animals that are going to be intaken this year. The same with our life-saving rate. How many animals do we want saved this year based on our strategic plan? You want to save them all, but the reality is that the goals that you set should be ones that are achievable, but also stretch you in a way that raises that sense of urgency for you and your staff. Innovation. So one of the things that I always look at is, what did I miss? Like, there, a lot of what we do in the shelter is already spoken for, but when I go to bed at night, I'm thinking, there's dogs out there right now running loose, impregnating other dogs, and they'll be in the shelter in 3 months. I think about those things. And I think as leadership, we should always take a look at, and no matter where you are in this business, should take a look at what can we do today that's going to impact tomorrow. What's the next big idea? So we all know that no kill is a movement, but what is the next movement? Where are we going in terms of the no kill? I think Gregory said it at the opening session, which is there is a next frontier, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So innovation, one of the innovations that we are really looking at now is something that I'm calling shelter science. So I believe there's a gigantic disconnect between our veterinary science and our staff. Now, I can speak for the shelters I've worked in. A lot of our folks didn't really, some of them didn't graduate from high school, some of them are in different levels. So some of the concepts that veterinary science has to offer don't resonate because it's not translated in a way. So what happens, and what I have found, is that it puts our veterinarians in a really, in a position of looking almost like an alien from another planet. And, just visit her planet when you have an animal, or his planet, and leave his or her planet once there's no more animal issues. But what I found is that, veterinarians are much more than that, and have a lot to offer. And some of them, by putting anybody in a box, it really stunts the growth. I also believe that if we have a different relationship with our veterinarians, it won't be as difficult for us to attract veterinarians to our shelters, because when you look at the information, especially around pay, the pay is comparable. What a lot of shelters pay is comparable to what a lot of veterinarians are making outside of the shelter. So this is our shelter veterinarian, Dr. Hillary Herendine. And this is actually a conversation that the two of us had. And this is what kind of got, because everywhere I've gone, there's been this idea of isolation with the vet and a distrust. And so Philadelphia was no different. And so the reality is that, all we have looked at veterinarians for traditionally is to make medical decisions, to not to get involved in policy making, to keep them at arm's length. They aren't, there's a stereotype, veterinarians don't like to supervise or manage, and they can't. They don't teach it in vet school. Well, how many of you went to school for management and you're actually managing people? Never thought about that, did you? The veterinarians are not capable of making programmatic life-saving, shelter, or enforcement program decisions. And that's just an idea of asking them to stay in their box. But if you think about it, every medical decision affects pretty much the whole shelter, as every management decision affects the whole shelter and affects the medical. And so how do we merge these concepts? So, one of the things that we did with our veterinarian, and part of this is that she had an interest, but this is I had the opportunity to work with the national fellows that are sponsored by, the University of Wisconsin. And a lot of the vet students, or not vet students, the veterinarians that were part of that fellowship, they expressed a similar frustration as to, that they feel like they're put in a box. But, there are ways for us to integrate them as policymakers, and media darling, we bring our veterinarian out, and I always tell Dr. Hillary, as long as you don't talk about elephants, we're fine. She has this thing about elephants, and she can go on a tangent about elephants. So we're talking about dogs and cats. We're not talking about elephants. As long as you don't talk about elephants, we're fine. And so they do need some coaching, but they're excellent information, and they also give you that credibility with the public that allows you to say, yeah, not only do we have our decision making, but the science behind our decision making is sound. And the only way we get to that point is if we bring the veterinarians into the conversation. And she really is. She's a shelter director in the making. And I'm using her as an example just to kind of give you an indication of a veterinarian who, she actually told me last week, she said, I wish I didn't become a veterinarian. I wish that I had really focused more on being a shelter director. And so that's something that, had I not been listening to her, had I kept her in her box, that's a conversation we would have never had. So the next innovative thought process I have, and I will explain this graph to you. So our current process right now is we send people out into the community, or people from the community come into our shelter and drop off an animal. And all of us do it pretty much, but that is an antiquated process. Now, has anybody thought of anything better? I think there are concepts that are better, but have we fully implemented them? No. And so what's happening is that the owner, you pick the animal up, or some good Samaritan takes him out. So now the owner has to chase the animal back to the shelter to find them. When the animal was in the community, most of the time, for the most part, they weren't really causing any public health or safety issue. And so they've been taken out of their community. And now, a lot of times, we take them out of their community, who already has resources for them. And the reason we know that is because they come into our shelter healthy, and then we put them into another community. And so we're redistributing animals all over the place. When, in reality, what if we could come up with a concept of keeping the animal inside their own community? How are you going to do that? I'm glad you asked. The reality is that we should be using some of our resources so that animals, when we find them in the community, stay in the community. So the person who's feeding the dog and the owner died 3 months ago, but I've been feeding them. How do we get the resources, shuttle the resources out to them in order for them to take full responsibility for that animal? That's a different question for all of us in terms of resources, because we come from different resource backgrounds and different resources within our city. But that's a question that we need to really answer. What if you had animal control officers? Let's take them, for instance. They're out in the community. They see the problem at the point of its origin. What if we trained them and hired the type of people that could adopt an animal out right then and there using processes? Now, I'm not telling you to go running back and do this. Actually, I am. But what I'm saying is strategically plan it. What if you could, there are RTO programs. I can cite San Antonio's. RTO, like 3,700 animals back to their owner, because we changed policies. We taught our officers differently. We brought in people who had a more of a life-saving mindset, and we had those people really work with the staff on why we want this to happen. And by telling our story to the staff, how many minutes do I have? 15? 5? 4 minutes? 14 minutes. Oh, okay, I'm doing good. Okay, so instead of transporting animals that are already spoken for, a lot of these animals are being fed some way. So how do we take those resources? How do we identify the resources that animal is using to stay healthy and to have a healthy body condition score? How do we use that? How do we create programs that has that animal stay in the community? What story do we tell the community to have them support us? The reason I'm saying that is because we address the problem at the point of its origin. And that is, I think life-saving programs, I love them, but they are trying to cure something after you've already attained it, rather than prevention, which we've all been taught, very simple concept, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we could prevent the problem by addressing it at the point of its origin. There's programs that are doing it right now, Pets for Life. There are cities that are implementing their own programs, community programs. We had in San Antonio the Comprehensive Neighborhood Sweeps Initiative. That was a very big concept. There are intake diversion programs that are now being funded and granted for, but that's the question. We can do this by using the biggest outreach program in the humane world. It's our animal control officers. I can speak from experience Now, the question, and then people may think, well, why? I mean, they're going to write a bunch of tickets. What are we teaching our officers? Are we teaching them just to go out there and be punitive, or are we providing them with training, resource? Are we hiring? Remember, you can change the people, or you can change the people. Do we have the proper management structure in place to make these things happen? None of the concepts that I'm talking about today are ones that you can easily get to, but it's a question of gravitational pull. It's a question of what are we teaching staff, and how are we making those things happen? So, and as you can see, animal control officers love animals, most of them. The ones that don't, yeah, we need to purge them. I mean, we need to, promote them to citizen, as they say. So I'm free for any questions at this point.